With everything that's going on in Washington, we want to get the perspective from someone who's worked in this town since the Nixon administration. Leon Panetta was Bill Clinton's chief of staff, then served as CIA director and defense secretary under Barack Obama. Secretary Panetta joins us from California, and welcome back, sir, to Fox News Sunday.
Nice to be with you, Chris.
You lived through the uproar over Vietnam. You lived over the crisis of Watergate. How much trouble is the Trump presidency in right now?
It's one of those moments, if you're in the White House, where you really have to look at the situation and try to do what you can to try to provide a little better stability for the country. There's just too much chaos, too many crises going on. I think it's very upsetting for the country, for our economy, for the world. I just think I think this is a moment where the president really has to focus on what steps need to be taken in order to provide a little better stability for the country.
We're going to drill down on each part in a moment, but when you look at the broad picture, the government shutdown, the free fall in the markets, the real disarray and now resignations when it comes to national security, have you ever seen this particular kind of combination on all these different fronts?
Well, Chris, as you know, I've been in politics over 50 years in a number of positions and working under 9 presidents. I've never seen a situation like this in which almost every important area that is key to this country is confronting crisis or confronting crisis in terms of our national security. I think obviously the step to suddenly withdraw those troops from Syria has sent a terrible message to the world about where the United States stands. I think we're seeing the economy racked by a crashing stock market in the sense that the stock market is not quite sure what's going on, and we have the shutdown of the federal government all occurring at the same time and raising real concerns about whether or not this instability is going to shake the country in terms of our security.
Well, let's talk about the national security component of it first. In your last job as Secretary of Defense, we have had these abrupt shifts in policy, pulling out of Syria, drawing down in Afghanistan, the resignation of Defense Secretary Mattis. But President Trump did campaign saying he did not want to be engaged in these endless wars. In that sense, isn't he keeping a campaign promise?
Well, the question the president has to decide is whether he upholds his oath of office as President of the United States to protect our security, or whether he's simply going to move forward and fulfill campaign promises. I think the more important responsibility is to protect this country and protect our security, and that should come first. A lot of presidents make campaign promises, but when they become president of the United States, their primary responsibility is to protect our country and to do what's necessary to protect our national security.
Let me just push back on that a little bit, because we've been in Afghanistan for 17 years, and we're certainly still not winning. In Syria, the people that are now criticizing, a lot of them, especially Democrats who are criticizing President Trump for pulling out of Syria, are the same people who were criticizing President Obama for failing to put troops in. I mean, you could argue that maybe this is the best option.
Well, again, I think the fundamental question is, are we going to deal with the threats to our country? 9/11 was an attack on the United States of America. We lost 3,000 people, over 3,000 people that day. We went to war as a result of that, confronting al-Qaeda, bin Laden, and now ISIS. We have made good progress in that fight, but it's not over. And so to suddenly declare victory when we have no victory, we've made good progress, no question about it. We've made tremendous gains. But this is not a time when you're dealing with terrorist groups who can reorganize and threaten the security of our country. This is not a time to back away from that responsibility. And that, I think, is the message that concerns me. We're sending a message to ISIS that somehow they can come back, they can be resilient, they can at some point come back and attack us and have us vulnerable to another 9/11 attack. That's unacceptable.
Let's talk about the shutdown. You've worn a lot of hats during your time in Washington, and you were a budget director for Bill Clinton back in the 90s. The border wall, $5 billion for the border wall. The Democrats are saying, well, they'll give $1.6 billion for border security. President wants $5 billion for the border wall. I mean, a couple of questions here. How much of this is politics? How much of this is policy? And when I say politics and policy, I mean on both sides. And as someone who lives in California and knows about the difficulty of trying to control illegal immigration, what's wrong with a border wall?
Well, I've never quite felt that an 18th century solution applies to the 21st century in terms of building a wall. I do think it's important to have strong border security. I do think it's important to develop, in many ways, the technology and the other steps necessary to create what should be a virtual wall. But the idea of spending $5 billion to build a wall when, as we know, any wall is vulnerable to the highest ladder that goes over that wall is just politics. I realize he made a promise on this, but what's playing out now in Washington is a political confrontation between the president and the Democrats, and the American people are paying the price for that. I mean, there are innocent people now as a result of this shutdown who are being hurt. Innocent men, women, children, families at Christmas time. Why take it out on them? The challenge of a president and the leadership in the Congress on both sides of the aisle is to sit down and resolve these issues and to deal with it. And yes, you know, I understand the different positions, but what's missing in all of this is a comprehensive approach to immigration. That's what's needed. That's what's always been needed. You can't just solve this problem with a wall. You have to deal with every element that is broken now in our immigration system.
Finally, sir, and I've got less than a minute left, I know that you have a lot of disagreements on policy and probably on behavior, conduct with this president. But after this week and what you've seen, whether it's the shutdown or the abrupt 180-degree turns on Syria and Afghanistan, do you have any doubts about Donald Trump's fitness to be president?
You know, Chris, I believe deeply in the office of the presidency, and regardless of who is president, I want that president to succeed, because if that president does not succeed, the country pays the price. So what I would like to do is to see President Trump recognize the chaos and crisis that we're in right now, this period of tremendous instability that is hurting the country in terms of our security and our economy, and take steps, appoint a strong chief of staff, not just an acting chief of staff, appoint a strong Secretary of Defense, right. Abide by the policy-making process that is important to the White House. Do what is necessary to be a strong president of the United States. That's what I want him to do.
Secretary Panetta, thank you. Thanks for sharing your weekend with us. And, sir, to you and to your family, Merry Christmas.
And a Merry Christmas to you, Chris, and to all of your viewers.